Nice.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. See, we've already got some people in here that were waiting. Thank you, folks. We're probably going to just hang out and just talk about the news for about 5 minutes. And then once we have everyone in here, we'll go ahead and get started. So, Rob, how's your day going?
Well, as a startup, it's always busy.
Yeah.
But yeah, news, man, there's just so much always going on, whether it's Russia, Israel, the American politics. Keeping up with it is really exhausting, I gotta be honest.
Yeah, I can imagine. That's a lot of stuff. So, is this your first startup?
Actually, no. Ask News is our second.
Okay.
We started with Emergent Art, where we were generating art. This was back in like 2017. This was a really fun project. This was long before Gen AI art was ever even conceived. We were using a method called style transfer. Have you heard of this?
I have. Yeah. That was the StyleGAN was like a big thing.
Exactly. It's really cool. And I still think it's super powerful, good for full control. It gives you a lot of control. Whereas with Gen AI, it's text to image.
Yeah.
I think a lot of these new apps do allow you to introduce templates and kind of, put your face in there or like morph the style, which kind of takes it over. But this was a long time ago. So we developed our own software for it and we were just generating tons of stuff. It was written in TensorFlow version 1. So this was back when, before I jumped on the
sorry. Your array is a 0x2 instead of a 2x0.
Did you play with TensorFlow back in the day?
Yeah. I was playing with TensorFlow because I used to be a data scientist, and of course, as a data scientist, you have to do some machine learning. What's up, AI for all? Thanks for joining us. We're probably going to get started. We already have about 30 people in here, so
Nice.
Thank you for showing up. And we're just kind of talking about current events before we get started. This is Rob from Ask News. My name's Terry. I'm from Qdrant. So, Rob, before we get started, any news that has kind of caught your eye? I know we have a lot of interesting stuff going on in AI right now. We have OpenAI that it's been leaked that they might be dropping their model in December. Anthropic just dropped their computer use model, as well as another model I saw. Perplexity is dropping all these tools. We have the character AI situation. We saw that the government released a little brief on AI safety. Anything that caught your ear that you'd like to talk about?
Related to AI, yeah, there's always so much going on. I'm always really interested in the tiny models that are coming out and how those can be applied and fine-tuned.
Okay.
Probably because we don't have the resources to fine-tune anything bigger than the small ones. But
did you see the Microsoft, what is it, the ternary model?
No, I didn't see this one come out. I was thinking of 3.2 1B, and I think I saw some benchmarks showing that it was equivalent to 13B Llama 2.
Wow.
And just that level of compression is really impressive to me.
No, I mean, it's crazy the stuff you can do with the quantization and not really lose any performance or accuracy. It's kind of magical.
Especially with, I mean, a lot of the developments lately that I've been really, really interested in following was with Outlines. Are you familiar with Outlines, the library?
I'm not.
So Outlines is giving you structured output. They were doing structured output before structured output was cool. This was open source. These guys were open source structured output. And just so that we're on the same page.
Yeah.
I love Anthropic, but technically they still do not have structured constrained output as a feature.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. And Cohere just came out with structured constrained output like a month and a half ago, and it turns out that they just forked Outlines. Good, that's what it's for. But they recently got a big raise and partnered with Hugging Face to build a Rust core version of Outlines, which increases the efficiency quite a bit. and
Nice.
opens up all sorts of opportunities. Because obviously the higher efficiency we have, the more we can generate, which is what it's all about.
Yeah, it feels like literally every day there's a startup idea where it's like, oh, that would have taken you 10 years and 100 PhDs. And now it's like, Jimmy in the basement can build this in 7 seconds.
Like, it's insane. It
Yeah.
really is.
It really hit me because I was a data scientist for the Department of Homeland Security. And what I was doing was what Llama Parse does now. So my job was literally taking those documents, and we were using bigrams, n-grams to extract the text. But I see a tool like Llama Parse, and I'm just like, oh, that literally used to be my job. Yeah. So it's pretty interesting how things are changing.
Yeah, I think it's pretty underrated what small teams can do now, and that's kind of what this is a weird thing we've bumped into at Emergent Methods, because we're still a tiny startup. I think we're 5 or 6 people on a good day, depending on who's working with us and contracting, etc. But we talk to investors, or we talk to interested collaborators, and they're just confused by how much we're capable of doing at this point. And it's not like we're that special. We just know how to leverage these tools very well.
Yeah.
And that allows us to basically put on a project that, like you said, would have taken, I don't know, a year before, to do it in a month, or do it in a couple weeks.
Exactly. And with the small team, where you kind of don't have to worry about all the issues that come when your team starts growing.
Exactly.
So it's a nice combo. Yeah. Okay, I think we're going to get started here. So I love you mentioned Rust. So that's a really nice transition.
Yeah, that's our segue.
Qdrant, which is the vector database that we'll be talking today in association with Rob and Emergent Methods, is a vector database that was written in Rust. And it was written in Rust so that it can go really, really fast. And we're going to be talking today about how you can prototype, pivot, and perfect using Qdrant. And for the example, we're going to be talking about Ask News and some other products that Rob and Emergent Methods have released. So Rob, if you just want to quickly give a rundown of what you're doing over there at Emergent Methods and some of the products you have.
Yeah. So, at Emergent Methods, we're trying to stream really, really high quality context to LLMs. So we envision a future where you and your team are focused on your agentic application, and it's focused on domain-specific knowledge, private databases, combining all of that. And then at some point, you need some grounding in the real world. And we believe that grounding, the more sturdy that grounding is, the more high quality your application will be. And it turns out that it's damn hard to do that. And so we've basically just designed our company to let you outsource that component to us, so you can focus on your high-level abstraction. And that's basically why Ask News was born, because it turns out that real-world knowledge is baked into news. So if you do news right, you probably have a good, strong grounding. So that's it. I mean, that's our entire goal, is to do that at very high quality, and do this in a way that is frictionless and philosophically and mechanically aligned with your agentic application, right? So there's nothing super new about us, despite the fact that we're using all the new technologies, including Qdrant. What's really new is that we're thinking about quality, putting transparency, trust first in front of these AI first technologies, and doing that, putting it on an endpoint for you in as quick and low latency as possible. So that's what really separates us from traditional methods, which would maybe be like slow HTML dumps, type scrapes, super hallucination prone methods, not very reliable. That's what we want to eliminate and help you with and let you focus. So that's what we do. So Ask News is our main product, and we've grown quite fast. I think we started in production, I want to say 3.5 or 4 months ago, and we're already up to, I think, over 1,500 users at this point.
Yeah.
And that's, I mean, we have a ton of high derivative products on top of our grounding product, and that pushes us into a more of a research world. We we have the world's largest news knowledge graph. So we're taking it and all of this knowledge and structuring it with relationships so that when you extract your subgraph and pass that as context, your LLM has a lot of very, very rich information to derive insights and to, generate whatever the next step is in your pipeline. So that's kind of our general focus.
So one thing you mentioned that kind of caught my ear was the ground truth. And for some problems or for some AI applications, the ground truth is pretty simple, right? You can think of like a math app. There's a right or wrong answer. But then for other ones, I think the ground truth might be a little harder to define. So I'm a little curious, when you say ground truth, how do you define a ground truth?
Well, I think that's a fun topic, and we can talk about it. I'll just correct you. I said grounding, which is slightly different from ground truth.
Gotcha.
Ground truth, yeah, that is a really important point. And this is a whole domain of research that we've been focused on, and we found that, well, it's better to not even say what is true and what is false, especially when you're reporting the news. It's better to say what is the alignment across multiple languages, countries, and perspectives. We call this competing perspectives. And what are the contradictions? So as long as we present to you what is the alignment across multilingual perspectives and what's contradicting, then you can make your choice about what you want to believe. And it could very well be that, Swedish, French, Arabic, and English have all come to the wrong same alignment, and we've reported that to you. There's nothing for us to say what is right and wrong. That's a whole nother job. But it turns out that when you do it this way, you've kind of minimized the noise around what is misinformation, because it turns out it's really damn hard to get a bunch of languages on different continents to all agree on the same incorrect fact. So when you look for the alignment across all of these continents and languages, you end up finding a very, very truthful piece of information. But there's a lot of times where even the truth is reported without knowing what is technically out there, because it's something that's an ongoing development in the news, and that's not something that you can super easily report without going and investigating with more information, probably in the future. So a lot of this revolves around narrative tracking, is what we call it, where, okay, we have what we know now, but now let's wait till we have more information and continuously update.
Yeah, I love that so much, because the initial thing I thought of was some of the more polarizing stocks where you see the short versus the long be almost close to 50-50. And it's like, yeah, which side we're going to give you the information, and then you decide which side you want to be on.
Yeah, pretty much.
Nice.
We have, on that point, I'll just wrap it there. It was Texas, the Autonomy Lab. They are using the Ask News data source to detect misinformation, to do exactly this. But their methodology is, there's a data set of fake Reddit posts out there, and there's an entire domain of research around, could we have detected that these posts were misinformation when we were at that point in time? And so what they did is they took the Ask News data source and they take the post, they feed it to Ask News to get then our diversified multilingual, multi-continental context, pair that with the fake Reddit post and ask an LLM, hey, is this post fake? Is it real? Does it line up with the news? And it turns out that this increases the accuracy of misinformation detection by 20%, which is awesome. I think we're going to be doing, we have a plan, and Qdrant is part of this, by the way. This is because a lot of what's happening behind the scenes is, in order to do a back test like that properly, scientifically, rigorously, you need to be able to filter on time. You need to have a lot of strong metadata filtering techniques in order to make the retrieval appropriate or more relevant, essentially. So our goal, we'll probably write some blog post about it. I'm excited. I'm really happy that they came to these results.
Nice. Well, I think you just made a very nice segue for us to maybe start digging into the meat of how you're building apps. One thing I heard you mention was metadata filtering, and I definitely want to touch on that. But I'm wondering, maybe we should start with, how do you approach indexing? Because I can only imagine, if you're trying to index the news, first of all, how do you start and decide what is news and what isn't? That seems like there might be a kind of a blurry line there. And then second of all, how are you deciding what news sources to ingest? And then third of all, how are you keeping track of all of that data and kind of managing it and updating it and just making sure that your app doesn't die?
Yeah. We have an editor-in-chief. That's a big piece of it. So he was the editor for the Rocky Mountain News for 20 years. And so he's responsible for a lot of decision making around what is quality information and what is not. Now, we've leveraged his intelligence, right? He's one person, but we use AI to leverage that. And so what I mean is that we have this massive quality control pipeline, which is constantly reviewing what is this text. That quality control can be as basic and fundamental as, like, is this actually an article or is it a bad scrape, right? Like, did you accidentally scrape a bunch of JavaScript or a cookie, versus is this an article? But it gets deeper into, okay, what type of information is reported inside of this? Is this an objectively written article? Is it persuasive? Is it sensational? Is it subjective? And that allows you to start classifying the information. And so it's not necessarily a binary, this is news and this isn't news. It's more of a, here are some data points to help characterize this piece of information that someone down the line on the API can decide to use for filtering. And so what we do is we collect all of that metadata using a variety of tools. And some of these tools are our own tools, like Gliner News, which we've released open source on Hugging Face. And that's an entity extractor for extracting entities, which also help you determine what's inside of this
So
document.
you guys are doing some entity name recognition?
Yeah, exactly. A
Okay,
bunch
gotcha.
of this.
Very cool.
We do that. And so we take all of that metadata, and Qdrant is, I think I mentioned this to you yesterday, it's basically this super fancy NoSQL database where you're free to put whatever structured JSON dictionary you want as a metadata component to your vector. And that turns out to be extremely powerful when you do want to maybe only look at objective news, or only look at persuasive news, or only look at analytical information, or information that contains Joe Biden, because you have that vector similarity search, which is very powerful for semantic understanding and for term expansion. But when you really need to nail down, hey, I only want objective news right now, that's where having this NoSQL-esque approach tied into the Qdrant database comes in handy, because then you can use that filter. But then your third question was, how do you index all of it? And that's a really big piece of the puzzle that we've come to, because we have this API, we have a ton of people using it in a ton of different ways. Everybody has a different demand. Well, I want to filter on this, but I want to filter on this like a range, or I want to filter on this like a match, or I want this to be ands, I want these to be ors. And you get all of these demands from all these different early customers. And trying, as a founder, you try to decide what feedback should we take, which feedback should we not take. And some of those decisions would be ultra expensive if you were dealing with a traditional database where maybe indexing each of these items to make them actually available would require a bunch of RAM or a bunch more processing power. And so that's where, I mean, one of the prototyping things that I love about Qdrant is the ability to, just quickly put this thing on disk, because disk is very cheap. I have a single customer who says, hey, I think it might be cool for me to filter on this particular piece of metadata. I have the metadata. Let me toss it in on the on-disk index with Qdrant and let them play with it. Yes, the performance will be less good. It'll be much lower because it's pulling from disk. But at least that customer can come back and say, yeah, this works. And then maybe I have other customers that say, hey, I noticed works, but the performance is low. And then once you have enough and you've got the validation on that index, and you're like,
Yeah,
okay, now let's spend $100 on more RAM for this index per month,
exactly.
and then
Yeah,
bump it up off of disk. That's like that to me would be a prime example of essentially testing out a little product with a suggestion from a customer that you don't really trust, but just
yeah,
doing it because it's cheap and easy and it costs nothing, and then
yeah.
following it through.
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to ask you about is you mentioned on disk, and for those that aren't familiar, can you kind of explain maybe what the other options might be other than on disk?
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess most of the audience at least has some sense of indexing with databases, but the point of the index in a database is that it gives you access and easier filtering, more performance when you want to filter on some metadata piece. And so the example I was using before was reporting voice. You can store that index. Typically, that is stored in RAM because the index, the whole point of an index is that it's high performance, and so it's easily accessible. And when I don't know, I had never developed inside of Qdrant, but I have a sense that probably when you index one of these fields, you're essentially putting it into a key store and using some fancy techniques for deciding ranges or matches or stuff like that. And so that all of that information would typically go in RAM, and that RAM is very fast and expensive and not cheap in the cloud, but it's high performing. Now, with Qdrant recently, they came out with this feature, which is, hey, instead of putting all of that index on the RAM, what if just one of your indices you wanted to put into on disk, and disk would be like the slower hard drive that's running. And I mean, typically it would be a solid state drive, but the concept is the same. This is the large storage in the computer, which is very, very cheap, especially in the cloud. You have a lot of access to a large amount of it. And so that means that you're basically paying pennies on the dollar compared to if you needed to run it in RAM. The other point of disk is that it would be essentially stored there. It's not ephemeral. It won't. I forget the exact terminology, but with RAM, when your machine shuts down, the RAM disappears, right? And when you use disk, it stays. Of course, you know, with databases, they will populate RAM properly and stuff. But that's the long-winded explanation.
So it's almost like when you're moving to a new city, you might rent before you buy because it's going to be more economical on the long term to buy, but the flexibility you get from renting is worth paying that extra price.
Yeah, that's actually the best analogy I've heard in a long time, because you want to explore the city. You want to see, you're unfamiliar with the city, so you go test a neighborhood. You realize this is a terrible neighborhood. I'm glad I didn't buy an apartment here quickly. But while you were living there, you gained a bunch of information about the surrounding neighborhoods, and all of a sudden you have a lot of knowledge about exactly where you want to go. I love that. That is the perfect analogy, I think.
Thank you. And that kind of you kind of brought it naturally to HNSW, because that's often how I describe HNSW. I either use a Dewey Decimal System example or finding a location on a map. And I want you to talk a bit, if you don't mind, about quantization and how that has been helpful for you when you want to develop these apps.
Yeah, it's so, and I can quickly give my understanding of how Qdrant does it. Again, I didn't develop any part of Qdrant. I'm just a power user. We are a power user. So this kind of a similar principle where with quantization, you are reducing the precision of your vector, because you know, in our vector database, every vector is represented by some defined dimension of floats. That precision of each float costs a lot of memory in your expensive RAM and compute power, by the way, because multiplying long 32-point floats is more expensive than 16-point floats, more expensive than 8-point floats, or even integers. And so a lot of when you do that similarity search, which is what Qdrant does best, when you take a vector from the outside and you say, give me the closest vectors in your database, That
Mm-hmm.
needs to be done on this high precision vector. But with
Yeah.
quantization, we can essentially do that compute with a lower precision vector. And that saves a bunch of storage in your expensive RAM, and it makes the retrieval faster because the distance calculation between while you're doing your HNSW was a lot cheaper, since the CPU didn't have to crunch as many digits. And so for us, it's a really similar procedure of, okay, here's a vector. We add a vector to our database. Do we really need the highest precision? Let's first test it out with some lower precision ones before we really bump into making this more and more expensive. Because, for some databases, you don't need the highest precision. And I think news is actually a good example of it, especially archived news, because there's so much of it, and there's so many relevant ones from so many different sources. You would have to paginate pretty far to just even explore a small neighborhood. That tells me that even if I have 3% less accuracy, 5% less accuracy, 10% accuracy, I'm still hitting a really dense neighborhood of hyper relevant information. Now, this would not be the same if you needed to get to a document and you could not sacrifice being incorrect. So that would be a different application.
Yeah. So just kind of focusing on your use case for what you want to do. That's a question that I often get as a dev advocate. People will come to me and they'll say, hey, what embedding model should I use? And there's like 50 questions I need to ask you before I can answer that question, right? There's no one size fits all solution. So that's something that I'm often preaching is there's always going to be a trade-off no matter what you want to do, right? If you want to go faster, then you either have to pay more or lose in accuracy. If you want to be more accurate, then it's either going to be slower or you have to pay, So there's no shortcuts when you're building these apps. And that's important because the next thing I'd like to talk about before I'd like to actually dive into the applications, if you don't mind. But the next theoretical thing I'd like to talk about is evaluation. So that's another question I get a lot is, what's a good way to evaluate my app? And the answer is similar, right? You can't just be evaluating on churn, because let's say you have a medical app and you're not churning, but it's giving people bad data. That's not a good app. You can also just evaluate on accuracy, because going back to the example, if you have a medical app and it's super accurate, but it's churning like crazy, you don't have a good app. So you need to really think about what metrics matter to you in your application when you're doing evaluation. And if you don't mind, can you talk a bit about how you approach evals?
Yeah. The one thing I wanted to quickly go back to, when especially choosing, you said people come and they say, which embedding model is the best, which is the worst possible question. It just indicates that there's so much for you to learn, which is good. Honestly, it's a lot of trial and error on your data, because these things are trained on not your data. You could fine tune an embedding model for your data, but generally speaking, especially in news, you can, test a variety of these embedding models with trial and error. And I know this is not something people like to hear because it's a lot of work, but it saves you so much energy to spend 2 or 3 weeks working with a model, looking with your own eyes at the output. How is this thing actually doing? Really interacting with this thing, and then saying, maybe we can try something a little different. That investment of time pays dividends down the line after you've built an index of 100 million, and re-indexing it to a different embedding model is going to cost you, I don't know, $5,000 or $10,000 in the cloud just to re-index. So and like you said, maybe it's way more expensive than just that because of all the turn you had during that entire time of having a bad app. So to be completely honest, our main eval is our own human eyes. And that's part of why we are a human in the loop solution to the quality, because I don't think it's actually possible to automate away looking at the data. And so Ellen is responsible for looking at a lot of data all of the time. And this isn't just reading through what's coming out, it's plotting, right? What do these vectors look like? So a lot of, what do they look like in 3 dimensions? What do they look like in 2 dimensions? What do they look like if I look at the distance matrix and I threshold through? What's the distribution of, like, these are questions that people don't want to have to ask because it hurts to analyze. You have to pull the vectors. You have to really run scientific analyses. You have to think very critically about what's going on. And luckily, Ellen, who's our director of transparency research, focuses primarily on visualizing the data with our own eyes. So, you know, these are dashboards that are interactive in some ways, which are not external. They're completely internal, but it is, do we like how this embedding model works? What's the speed of retrieval? What's the quality of the output? How's the clustering when we do clustering? Because a lot of what we have to do when you do similarity search, you're essentially doing a clustering in some ways, right? It's like a naive cluster. So how do the clusters look when you do a clustering? How are they distributed? These are questions that are super hard to answer without just a human sitting there looking at a real data scientist who's trained in some kind of scientific method. And so that is the hard answer. There are some real nice libraries that we've used to help with testing retrieval, benchmarking retrieval, which is slightly different than what we're talking. Like, there's one which is, you know, making really informed human in the loop decisions about what tools to use and how to use them. But then there's like tracking the drift through time of what's going on with your system. Are you still tracking? Is your model still is the retrieval and accuracy still good? And we built a benchmark called Context is King for this, to solve this problem. And Context is King is an open source benchmark where we essentially do a live retrieval of all of the latest context providers, whatever databases they're using, it doesn't matter. And we use Ragas. And Ragas is this open source library geared for eval of LLM output. And so there's a bunch of different metrics in that library, and that library is always evolving. So I highly recommend people check that out. But some of the metrics include precision, which is like, is what was retrieved actually in the information I need, is it inside of my retrieved results? So what's the precision of the output? And then there's a correctness where you can actually set a ground truth. And that was kind of one thing we talked about earlier. Sometimes ground truth is easy. Like in this example, it would be like, who won the Yankees game? What's the answer to that, right? That's a very basic, fundamental, easy fact. We can compare how the retrieval was. If I ask News, who won the Yankees game? If I ask Gina AI, Tavily, or Exa. And so it turns out that those 3 providers can't actually get you that information, which is a fundamental problem with just scraping the web blindly. This is why like quality and of retrieval and indexing is so important. But yeah, so Ragas, you can essentially rerun this thing on your database to see, okay, how is the retrieval? How's the correctness?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I love the fact that you're talking about human in the loop, because I saw a tweet recently from Vicky Boykis. She's a machine learning engineer at Mozilla. And she was basically saying that these AI products that claim to be magic all have humans in the loop. And it kind of got people a little riled up, because I think a lot of people that are using these tools don't necessarily realize that there's still a lot of humans in the loop for the quality tools. There's no way to just automate all of this yet, right? Or maybe ever. So that's like a really...
Yeah. I mean, it's fun. It's fun to be the human in the loop, because you're taking this role which didn't really exist 2 years ago. And the role is, okay, how do I start to leverage that AI for my value, the values that I want to express into the world? So I think there's always going to be a human in the loop to some degree. And I think even with training these large foundational models, I'm not an expert at these large foundation models trainings, but I know generating the training data is a massive component of it, right? RLHF, that's human in the loop. You have human feedback, but it goes even deeper, just generating the data. My understanding is for a lot of these really good coding tools, they have developers out there just like commenting through very cleanly their code to give a sense. That to me is still human in the loop. There's there's different degrees of it, but
yeah. No, I mean, if someone comes to you and says, "Hey, I want you to build an app, but build it for the purpose of ingestion into an LLM," then even if the LLM is then taking it from there, that's a human in the loop, right? Because I think a lot of, go ahead.
Sorry, I was finish up. I'll jump in right after.
I think a lot of the issues sometimes we get with the generation of this code is kind of like the Delve thing, where it's like most of the code on the internet isn't great. So if that's our training set, then the app isn't going to be great either, right? That's just kind of how the world works.
I don't know if it's a slight tangent if we can go on it, but
it was
a fun chat. I was debating with Ellen. I don't know, this was 2 days ago or something, about model collapse and our beliefs on model collapse, because it kind of goes to this point of, there's this theory. Have you heard of this general model collapse, or like the internet's going to be a wasteland of AI generated garbage, and then the AIs are going to train on the AIs, and they're going to they're not going to be able to speak.
Yep.
Right. So there's a theory around that about how, recycling AI generated crap into the training. But personally, and I can see where the theory comes from, but personally, I think as long as humans are still expressing their values into the output, you're always going to have valuable training data out there. And especially when we have tools to reason through what we want as training data and what we don't, and even how to modify and curate and build synthetic training data based on real data, using these very intelligent engines. To me, I don't see a model collapse incoming. Maybe people in the audience, I'm happy to have them call me out and tell me I'm wrong, because Ellen's on the other side of the fence here. But I think as long as there's a human expressing values, which I believe there always will be, then those values will always be present in some way in that training data, which makes the training data valuable. What do you think?
Yeah, I think we're always going to have shortcuts or proxies is maybe a better example for quality data. So if we're looking at code, for example, and you're like, hey, I want my LLM to be able to do FizzBuzz, you could have an LLM that knows what the runtime complexity of the function is, and then tell it, I only want results that are, ON or O log N or whatever, right? That piece, I feel like we could kind of automate, but the question is, you could write something in O log N, but it sucks. And then it's like, okay, great. So at some point we have to have a qualitative filter, which I think is a lot harder to apply, especially with things like writing. I think being able to write well is going to become a skill that becomes more and more valuable, because right now we're kind of getting inundated with the slop, right? If you open up any of these apps, Twitter, whatever, you're going to see people who clearly went to AI app to create their content, and you just scroll by it like, whatever. I'm sure this person has a million accounts just posting trending topics all day. But you'll also come across a tweet where it's like, ooh, this person has good prose and they know what they're talking about and they make a good point. You hit that follow button immediately. I think as people are more and more exposed to kind of bad quality stuff, their sense of taste is really going to explode. I think that's going to be one of the benefits of all this AI generated content. We see it already with art, right? Like before AI art, being into art and like looking at it through that lens was a very niche thing. Now, pretty much everyone is looking at a picture and they're like, like, let me examine the quality of this picture. Is it AI? Is it not? Oh, this is what makes it AI and what makes it not. Like they're basically taking an art history 101 without realizing, right? So, because if you show someone a Picasso, no one's like, yeah, that's AI generated, right? You show them a Basquiat, you show, like, once you have that eye, you can tell when it's been created by a human. So I think we're actually going to see a bit of an elevation of the culture, and especially in the classical arts, where it's going to be a lot harder to come up with these qualitative things outside of a human looks at it and is like, yeah, that's good writing.
Yeah, I would love for that to be the case. And I think you're onto something, especially the person who you hit follow on, who you liked what they said. I'm perfectly happy for them to use AI to help start, right? As and this person will go in and will modify and tweak and maybe rewrite a full thing, or that to me is so powerful, and it's just spell check of the new age, right? There's no, yeah, you're abstracting slightly further away from the writing itself, but you still have control. You're still expressing your beliefs into there, and people can detect it. Like you said, people are smart, and they're going to get hopefully smarter at being able to see, oh yeah, this is just, this is cold. It has no voice. It's just the internet voice, which is basically all of the LLMs, versus this is someone who sat there and expressed their feelings, which is crazy that humans can detect that through Twitter, to be honest.
Yeah, no, it is crazy. It's a like pretty solid defense mechanism. I guess we're preparing for the robot invasion. But the other thing is also, I think, like, if you're using Midjourney or whatever, and you're creating Picasso level stuff where no one even for a second thinks that it's AI art, I would argue that that is something that deserves praise. That's impressive work, and you should be praised for it. Same thing with writing. If you can write Harry Potter in ChatGPT, awesome, man. But if you can write The Quantum Musician, put it out. I'll read it. I think the pain point is when it's clearly artificial, right?
Well, I've been watching a lot of people discuss that art point, and I don't think I agree with you on that particular point about how if I can text to image something that can pass for art, that it is worth it for some reason. And I think it's the art community really appreciates where the art came from. It seems the best art always has some backstory, right? Picasso was a tortured soul, right? And so all of his work, or Van Gogh was probably the most tortured of them all. And so just knowing his story gives all of his art such a high value. Whereas if the story is like, and this was generated in 13.1 milliseconds on Midjourney by this kid in his basement who had really no problems or issues in his life, like, yeah, maybe it somehow won an anonymous art competition because the visuals were nice, but I feel like it's not going to last the test of time.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean we can't be augmented by these machines.
No. That's a really interesting point you make, because when I go to a museum, almost as much as I enjoy seeing the art is reading about how that piece came, especially one that really hits you. You really want to know, okay, what was the artist going through? Like, what was the context of the piece being released? All of these things. And that's part of what makes art history really fun, right? When you see a piece and you're like, ooh, they're referencing that other piece that other guy referenced, that other guy, that the story that's being told there is powerful. And it's one I hadn't considered. So I might have to go back to the lab and kind of cook up something, because I've been to AI art galleries where the art does look cool, but it's not LACMA. Right? It's not the De Young Museum. It's not MoMA. I know what you mean in that sense, right? There's a difference of, it's almost like the gravity of the work just doesn't really weigh on you. It's just cool.
Yeah.
It's
and
like a meme.
The pixelation is a big issue to me as well, because just seeing these paintings that are, 150, 200, 300 years old, and that thick impasto, paint, like just cracking ever so slightly, and the discolorations, to me, it's like, putting it up on a big 4K vertical screen, it's really stunning, and I really enjoy looking at it and just taking it in, but there's something just missing. But it could be that I'm just a millennial, man. I'm just out of touch with tech. Maybe all the Gen Zs are going to be like, screw real paint.
Well, what I imagine might happen, right, is that the Midjourney of the future is a robot that actually paints on a canvas.
There
And
already is
then
one out there,
okay,
actually. He's been around for
fair
a
enough.
while, but there'll be a better one for sure. This guy was
Yeah, yeah,
around when we were doing our art business back in 2017. We collaborated
okay.
with him, and yeah, he built this robot, and the whole point of the robot was to take an image and try to paint it with colors. So it had the colors here. It would dip the brush. It would, and this was in 2017. This was hard stuff. I was really impressed.
Yeah.
And so that I think maybe you're right, but still there's some, maybe if the robot has a story and the robot gets a background and a character, and it has a presence in society, as this is what this robot is. It has some suffering, right? I think as long as the robot has some suffering, maybe then there'll be good art. I don't know.
Yeah. Have you ever watched Bad Robot on
No, I don't
Netflix?
think I saw this one.
So it's basically a kind of vignette style where they have these little 5 to 7 minute animated videos that cover different topics. And one of the topics they covered in their first season was basically exactly this. There was a robot artist, and it was it was a human who turned himself into a robot. And it was kind of exploring that journey of what does it mean to make art when you're not human? And it's kind of a fascinating little short that I think you would enjoy. I think
Yeah, I'm gonna
it's
look that
called
up.
something. Yeah. Okay. I don't mind sticking around late, but I do want to get to the apps so that people can
Yeah,
actually
let's move.
see kind of the stuff you're building. Do you want me to share my screen, or would you prefer to share your screen and walk through it?
Let me see if I can share mine here. Let's see if it opens up.
Okay, no problem.
I think I can just jump
I'd
in
like
and
to
present.
go over the application so that Rob can kind of give us a nice in-depth look. And then I see someone asked a question about, does Rob have any advice for getting a job in this industry? A lot of our people are, of course, either students or maybe someone who's working currently as, doing something adjacent to AI, and they want to really dive in. So after you demo the app, I would love to hear you talk a bit about what your advice would be for someone who wants to get in here.
Yeah, I'll be excited to answer this question.
Okay, cool.
Do you think, I think we have mostly developers in the audience, right? I mean, I'm going to focus
mostly
slightly
developers,
towards developers.
builders.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
Ask News here, this is your front page. This is a B2C app, so you're welcome to come just consume news. The main goal here is that, oops, I'm not logged into the right plan here, but if you're logged in, you'll be able to read the whole story. And here's where I talked about the alignments across different countries, the contradictions across different countries, as well as kind of
the sorry to interrupt. This is
Yeah.
going back to, you mentioned you were looking for that alignment.
Exactly.
This is what you're referencing here. This is the visual.
Yeah. So identifying the contradictions for you, like I said, you just log in here and you'll be able to read the story. Look at how Reddit is talking about it. As you can, the one thing I like to point out is all the
Reddit
different,
perspective.
there's really no English here, right? So when you read the story, you're reading, Portuguese and Ukrainian, Russian, Arabic. I don't think, this one is not based on any English, German. There's no English here. So that's a really interesting aspect of the retrieval part of this data. All this data is available on the API. So for sure, this is mostly just a visualization for users to look at, but yeah, this is how we would report on the North Korean troops in Russia. But from a perspective
And I'm
of,
curious.
yeah, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to jump over to the SDK, to the actual developer tool itself. So fire your question away.
I was going to say, in terms of the multilingual data, are you embedding that with a multilingual model? Are you just translating it all into, say, English and then embedding it? How do you handle the multilingual piece?
Yeah, that's a great question. For us, we live in a homogenized English world. So we're kind of we're going into English and out from English. But depending on which language you're after, we may feed you back the text that came from it basically we're choosing the models based on what's most effective, to for lack of better words. So, but in general, you can treat the system as an English homogenized world. So when you search for Putin, North Korean troops in Russia, you are going to get a bunch of German original articles, but here you've got our English understanding of what occurred there. So we've extracted facts based on journalistic integrity. So this is where the editor-in-chief comes in. When we do a translation and a summarization, it's not just a basic naive sentence extractor. It's what are the facts? What are the attributions? Who are the key people? Why have they said what they said? Real questions, so that help give context to your LLM down the line. But from a perspective of the actual tool itself, this is our docs, but the interaction with it's pretty easy. So we just have this SDK. So here's the Python version of it. And interacting, when I said earlier, I mentioned mechanically and philosophically aligned with this agentic world. This is what I meant, is that when you query into Ask News database, you're querying with natural language, right? You're querying, you don't have to translate to some fancy SQL, specialized niche SQL. You don't have to worry about ands and ors if you don't want. Your agent uses English to talk to Ask News to get news, which we think is the philosophical alignment with agentic LLMs versus traditional news APIs. Here, to query the API, you would need some special query language with ands and ors. You'd have to hope you don't accidentally add too many things. You would have to call an LLM to do it, which is expensive and slow. So this is really the foundation of what it is that we're trying to help people with, is one-liner, put your query in, get your context off, move on. Don't worry about this at the grounding aspect.
It's like, if you need news for your app, we don't want you to have to fight to get the news. Fight on building your app.
Exactly. That's precisely it. So this is the other thing I'll point out is, so this is our kind of news app, but we have our news endpoint, which is the foundation, but we have a bunch of high-level derivatives here. So for example, forecast is where we use our own news endpoint here to go try to help you generate and execute your forecast. So it's kind of like an ultra prompter, right? We do a bunch of steps for you here if you want. You don't have to use this. It's just a high-level derivative. Chat is the same. You can use our chat endpoint like an OpenAI endpoint if you want. All we're doing in the back end is querying our own database to get news and then giving it to an LLM and then responding to you. There's nothing super spectacular happening. You can do that yourself if you want to have more fine-grained control. The final piece that I really love talking about is the graph. And maybe if I can jump in to an actual visualization of it, if I can get...
Yeah, sure. And while you're pulling that up, I'm just curious, how many hours does it take to make a forecast?
Oh, wait, how many hours sorry, what was the question?
Like, if I wanted to make a forecast, how long would it take from me pressing that enter button to getting the forecast back?
It depends on your forecast and the settings that you've applied. So if you've said something like, for this forecast, for example, this was probably pretty fast. You can ask to look further back in time. You can ask to scrape the web, which will slow things down. So it really depends, but typically we aim to get you a forecast within 30 to 40 seconds if you include web scraping.
Oh my God.
If you don't include it, it'll be faster. But the forecast will include all of... Exactly. This is a lot because we've done a lot of pre-processing beforehand, right? Because yes, we've just handed 60, 70, 100 news articles to the LLM. But luckily, we did all the LLM processing beforehand, right? Because we just query Qdrant to get the news out. So that's really fast. To get 100 relevant articles, it takes 100 milliseconds because of Qdrant and because we pre-processed it. So that step, all of the processing of those we've done in the past. So now we just benefit from that speed, which is really nice. Because typically, if you are going to try to go analyze 100 articles, translate 100 articles, summarize them, it's going to take forever for sure. So
yeah, no, I mean, I love the people at OpenAI, but I ask O1 how to make a peanut butter jelly sandwich and it takes 40 seconds. So that's pretty impressive.
We take latency seriously. So if you're just querying the news endpoint, it should be less than 100 milliseconds if you're in North America. That's our goal. In Europe, it could be 200 milliseconds, and we're working on that.
Sorry to interrupt.
But yeah, so the graph component, we have this graph endpoint as well. So let's say you want to query and build a relational graph and feed a graph structure to an LLM, because we've noticed that LLMs respond really well to very structured information. So we structure the graph for you. This is a visualization of it, but of course it's available in a JSON for you to do whatever you want with, pass to an LLM. But handing something with this sort of metadata to an LLM is very concise and what we call prompt optimized, because you're feeding the least number of tokens possible by but containing the densest amount of information inside of it, which is an optimization of tokens. So you pay less when you do your next step here. Let's say you've just taken all of this, you hand it to the LLM. You've basically spoken a very concise language to that LLM, removing all of this extra, grammar and structure. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't potentially also do this, right? You can absolutely hand all of this text and get even deeper insights, and that's part of what we do with forecasts. But we also have the graph structure, and so this is a subgraph, but the news knowledge graph that we're building underneath, we're upserting millions and millions of entities every single day. And so it is the largest news knowledge graph on the planet, which we're really proud of. And it's taken a lot. Yeah. And it would not be possible without Qdrant, without a shred of a doubt.
In terms of, first, I have many questions, but the first one I'm going to say is, in terms of the data that you see coming in, do you find that there's like how long will we have to go from today to double the amount of articles on the internet? Is it a year? Or like how quickly are people putting out more content?
In our pitch deck, we have a graph that shows that the amount of data being created is going up exponentially. So okay. I guess that means it's going up exponentially. But news articles, it's a good question. This is open web scraped data. But a lot of publishers are going behind paywalls, as they probably should. And that's good. The stuff that goes behind paywalls is different types of information. And so I think what we're seeing is more publishers paywalling certain parts of their website while keeping other parts open, because you get a big benefit from keeping articles open, right? You get a lot of Google SEO, you get a lot of views and traffic. But then keeping like the kind of more expensive created information behind a paywall. And that's why we have licensed data sources for our analyst tier. And so that's where we've licensed data that are behind paywalls that give you access to a higher quality. And I think we're moving more towards that. That's probably the solution. And that's good. I think that's the way it should probably go.
Start building those relationships. I mean, even, not to be your biz dev person, but going to the New York Times and saying, hey, do you want people to be able to make forecasts based only on New York Times news? Or maybe New York Times and our affiliates, right? Because people do have a voice and kind of direction that they prefer to consume media from. So it makes sense that they'd want their forecast to come from that as well. I think that would be cool, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Go ahead. Sorry.
No, I was just going to say that's one of our targets, is being able to just talk to one source. And that's one thing some people are doing. They'll like ask the same question to Fox News as they do to CNN, and compare the response, which is really fun.
See the diffs. Yeah. See the diffs, baby.
And then the other, go ahead.
Oh, no, you got it.
I was going to try to answer the question. I don't know how much time we have left on the
I don't mind going long if you don't.
Nice.
Yeah. I think we're good.
Yeah, I mean, anyway, to wrap this, this is kind of our analyst tool. If you want a promo, reach out. We can give it to you, and you can jump in and play with it, build your own whatever topic you want, and chat with it, and generate your forecasts. if you want to jump on the API, all of this is available in there as well. So I'll
Why don't
stop
we
my
just
shill.
quickly, no. I was going to say, why don't we quickly answer the question, and
Yeah.
then if you're free, we can go back in and dive.
No, yeah,
Just in case.
we'll answer it. I think it's a good question about how to get a job right now. I think it's probably difficult, at least in the United States. My sense is the job market is saturated with a lot of people, job seekers, due to, I guess, Amazon layoffs and Google layoffs and Microsoft layoffs. So I think that if I were in this position, I would really try to differentiate myself by doing some small project that doesn't need to be groundbreaking, but it needs to demonstrate a passion. So, and hook into an open source tool that is relevant for where you're trying to go, right? And so for us, I think, seeing, a tool in a push to LangChain that could be useful, right, would be really powerful. Or a creative type of tool, or improving a tool in LangChain or something. And that would help you get some visibility. Of course, pushing directly to the company's projects, like pushing commits directly, solving problems for Qdrant. It's an open source project.
Yeah, that's
it's kind of hard to overlook someone that's come and solved a problem for us and not say, hey, I want to hire you. And so when people come to us, we have open source projects. Everybody that's worked at our company has come from Freak AI, which is our open source project for algorithmic ML, machine learning trading. But the point is that we were able to see how they worked in a PR. They contributed to a community that we care about, and we saw how we liked what the code they wrote, and then it was easy to say, take this project, let's go. And then this, I think, is, I don't know what this is. It's actually FREQ AI. If you Google.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah, that should be the
Algo trading.
FREQ.
Oh, it's free.
Anyway, good. Scroll.
Let me pull that up.
There it is. Yeah, it's open source.
Apologies.
We don't do much marketing on it. There's no money to be made on the project, which is fun. I like that part of it. But really, this is the whole goal is.
No,
it's an open source project. Go contribute to it, and we'll see you, right? Like, I'll see how you handle your PR, and if you're solving a problem that we have, it'll be great. So
that's super cool. That's super cool.
I think you guys do this in Qdrant, right? You have like Qdrant Summer, and you have a bunch of devs that come in. I think another way that I've seen people get visibility in Qdrant was they wrote just a cool blog post that used Qdrant in some interesting, even contrived way, right? Doesn't necessarily need to be this groundbreaking thing, but it's just an interesting blog post. It shows your thought process. It gives you some visibility. So I don't know. What do you think?
No. So it's funny that you gave that answer, because I got my job at Qdrant by implementing semantic cache, which is kind of my passion in life.
Nice.
I think it's like a widely underused technique that people are really sleeping on. Right now, I'm actually working on a heuristic system to create your semantic cache, because of course, if someone's coming in and saying, what temperature is it in Alabama, you don't want to cache that, because that's going to be changing all the time. But maybe you could cache it through the time period that the temperature is going to be stable, right? And then those temporal factors. So kind of coming up with a heuristic system for people to be able to deploy semantic cache and not lose performance, but save a whole lot of money. That's kind of my passion, because I'm a little confused as to why more people aren't using it.
I want to use it, but my main problem is that what you just described was, with music changing so frequently, I'm scared to cache it and give you old results, because we've got some data coming in. So we need a way of like deciding. It's almost like I want my semantic cache to see that part of the parameter space, which was touched, and then only basically expire the cache if that part of the parameter space gets some updated points around it. I don't know. That would be my solution, but that's why we can't use it. I want to really bad. So if you can give me a solution, I'm on board.
No, that's literally the project I'm working on right
Nice.
now. Because I want to make it super academic, super thorough, and kind of like write a little or a long paper, it's actually becoming, about what the best techniques are. And then of course have a library that's included so that you don't have to do it if you're not a coder.
I don't know how you guys are always solving problems that we end up needing the solutions to. So thanks,
Well,
I guess.
it might be actually reverse, Rob. We might just be using you as our muse.
Fair
Like,
enough.
well,
Good. As
if
long as
Rob,
as long as something works, that's all that matters for us. I mean,
because
honestly, yeah.
another, sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, being a startup without any resources, having a company like that kind of driving on a similar path, basically treading the way, is useful.
No, I hear you loud and clear. Another thing is I'm working on is embedding model evaluation, right? So one of the things you mentioned earlier was when people want to choose that embedding model, it's like there's a bit of a difference between that and the eval process. So my idea was, what about a website where you can go in, you can either upload your data or just, type in whatever your data is, copy paste it. We would take a sample of that data. We run it through all the embedding models that we offer on Fast Embed, which is Qdrant's embedding model library. And then we're going to give you similarity scores, a correlation matrix, performance scores, like maybe a cost estimate, so that you can just select, hey, I want to see what Nomic, small embed, and clip do for this model or whatever, right? And then just instantly get results back based on what you care about, right? If all you care about is semantic similarity, then just pick the one that did the best there. If all you care about is whatever. So that's also something I'm working on.
Yeah, don't tell Ellen about that, because you're going to distract her from the other stuff that we need her to work on.
Okay.
But that sounds like exactly what she would try to do when she's human in the looping this stuff, right? Like exploring. Those are the metrics that.
Yeah,
that's
and
awesome.
I think the power of the human in the loop here is, I'm going to give you the metrics. You still need a human to be like, I know that this one is the best with similarity score, but we shouldn't use it because of X, Y, Z.
Yep, exactly.
Giving people that information without them having to do the trial and error, I think would speed up development. So,
was it the Qdrant post that said something about how all the latest embedding models are probably overfit on MTEB, so that they're probably, the scores are kind of useless now?
Yeah, I mean, if you go to MTEB and you look at the top scoring ones and you actually try to implement it in production, what you'll find is that there's a bit of a dependency salad going on, where it's almost impossible to reproduce in production, because these research libraries are like very A, finicky, and B, they've been designed specifically for the MTB, right? And that's not to say that performance on the MTB is like pointless, but it's just something to consider when you see these models at the top. Like, try to go implement one and see what performance you get, because it's not going to be what they got on the leaderboard.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah. So, did you have any questions or anything else you wanted to mention before we sign off here, Rob? This was a lot of fun.
I think it was good. Let's do this again.
Yeah.
No, I've got nothing. I'm just happy we could kind of come on here and geek out about indices. People should come to essentially the Qdrant Discord and just geek out with us there. That's where we're typically talking about a lot of this stuff. And
let me drop the link.
Yeah, drop that in there. We have an Ask News Discord. I think I can toss it in here. Let me see if
Thank you, sir.
Here we go.
And yeah, Rob, thank you so much for joining. This is by far the most popular webinar that I've ever had. We had 50 concurrent max and about 100 plus total. So I guess people really like what you're doing, Rob. Good job. Really like Qdrant too, right? We're a good team.
As long as you guys keep pumping out the features, we should be good for more content. Let's go. Anyways, thanks.
Yes. We are all about vector search, and we will keep pumping out the vector search content. All right. I'm going to be ending this. Thank you so much. Rob, do you have any socials or anything you want to shout out before we log off?
Just asknews.app and
Ask News, baby.
You get the unbiased, transparent picture. We're working really hard at that. Thanks.
I actually, if you don't mind, can you elaborate on that point?
On which point?
Why do you think it's important? I think it's important to have, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, we think because right now there's so much there's so much biased, sensational perspectives going into your news diet. Even websites like ground.news, they kind of pre-bias you because they say this outlet is always right. But it turns out that actually Fox News might have some information that someone on the left cares about, and CNN might publish some information that someone on the right might care about. And so finding the alignment to me is more important than like out front just saying like, this is all right, don't trust this outlet, it's right. Even like what RT says, Russian propaganda, what they say things, and it's important to understand what they're saying and what they're not saying and when they say it and when they don't say it. And that sort of stuff is what we're really focused on. I think that's important. And our editor-in-chief is he's pro at this, so he's not messing around. So I think I really like seeing people use it. So the more you guys use it, the better.
Yeah, and I wanted you to elaborate on that because I think that's really the power of these AI applications, is taking something that, like, in theory, this is an AI, but we can add in AI to augment it and make the human process much more pleasurable, much more dependable, and much more robust. So thank you so much for the time today, Rob. Rob is the founder of Ask News. They are an Emergent Methods product. Check them out on LinkedIn, Google, all that good stuff. They've also got that Freak AI project. Feel free to make contributions. My name's Terry Damiba. I'm a developer advocate at Qdrant. You can find me. I'm most active on X, Terry P. Damiba. And it was wonderful speaking with you, Rob. Once again, I'll see everyone on the other side.
Ciao.